In order to prepare for our future, we need to understand our past. We need to acknowledge our ancestors' trials and triumphs. We need to understand how we got to where we are today. Identity is composed of both the past and the present. And in order to understand my identity, you need to understand my past and how it has shaped my life. Depending on the land and its water for survival, the Peña family line has run deep through the soil of Servieta, New Mexico for many generations, going back as far as 7 generations. My great-great-grandfather, Pantaleon Peña, was born in 1840 in Ojo Caliente, New Mexico. He married Maria Gallegos, and together they had 20 children. One of Pantaleon's accomplishments was conquering Servieta, New Mexico. One of his daughters, Cleofes Peña, married Manuel Quintana. Cleofes and Manuel Quintana are my great-grandparents, and together they had 6 children. One of their sons, Dennis, is my grandfather. It is said that when Cleofes and Manuel began to bear children, they had promised her brother and sisters, Samuel, Martina, and Delmiria, one of their children. The child that was given to Cleofes' siblings to raise was my grandfather, Dennis.
My dad ended up staying with a lot of property that got inherited by his uncles. And he ended up being a farmer, a rancher, a logger. What he could do, work for the Forest Service, and he did a living how he could, but he mostly depended on the ranch, on the sheep, and then later on he ended up raising cattle, and from then he took off all his properties that is for we, all the family of 7, have inherited over here in Servieta, and we've been living here on this property for most of our lives. And I want you to see a view of what the property looks like, how he made a living. He was the first man to bring a well into Servieta, a first man to bring a tractor and a TV to Servieta. He was the one with the first balers and everything else. And he was very well set up by his uncles.
My grandfather grew up next door to my grandmother and her family in Servieta, New Mexico. All throughout their childhood and adolescence, my grandfather pursued my grandmother, who in turn played hard to get. When my grandfather left to serve in Korea, he kept in contact with my grandmother through letters. When he returned home, one of the first things that he did was ask my grandmother to marry him. My grandfather married my grandmother, Manuelita Griego, on June 16, 1954. My grandparents had 5 children together, one of them being my father, Luis Peña Sr. My grandfather was very proud of his family and his land, and he made sure that his children and grandchildren understood the significance that the land had for our family. He wanted us to acknowledge the hard work and sacrifice that went into working the land and making it what it is today. One thing that my grandfather encouraged his family to do is to continue working the land, never sell it, and pass it on to the future generations, along with the family history that is tied to it. My grandfather died in 2001, leaving it up to the younger generations to maintain the family ranch. Today, my siblings and I perform the same tasks that my grandfather did, such as digging the acequias, planting the garden, and harvesting the crops. Even after my grandfather's death, his wisdom and mindset are still seen within his children and grandchildren. The younger generations are keeping up with what the ancestors had started so many years ago. Tradition is much more than keeping up with the task. It is keeping up a lifestyle that is cherished by many northern New Mexicans today.